Hello friends. First of all, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can be informed about the videos I upload, and especially to like the video. Thank you. Now, let's move on to our video. Divine beings said to have come from the heavens. The first entities to ever set foot on planet Earth. According to some historians, they were the architects of humanity itself. According to others, they were the forces that shape our beliefs and religions. So who exactly were the Anunnaki? Where did they come from? How did they emerge? And why did they become some of the most important and mysterious figures in human history? In this special episode of Find the Truth, we will attempt to uncover the secrets behind one of the internet's most talked about mysteries. Our journey will take us deep into the origins of civilization itself, and all the way back to the roots of religions and ancient mythologies. And in the end, we will try to find the answers to these questions together. The year is 1968. After years of research and travel, investigative author Erich von Däniken releases a book that would soon influence the entire world and open a brand new chapter in popular culture. The book was called Chariots of the Gods. In it, von Däniken presents a striking idea that civilizations from completely different parts of the world, with no known contact between them, somehow shared the same symbols, the same myth, and even similar architectural and technological achievements. Following these claims, he introduced a concept that would soon become widely known and endlessly debated: the ancient astronaut theory. According to this theory, Earth was visited by extraterrestrial beings in the distant past, and humanity experienced a sudden leap in civilization, building structures that would have been considered impossible for that era. To support this idea, von Däniken pointed to examples such as the Nazca Lines in Peru, formations that can only be fully understood from the sky, or the Egyptian pyramids, structures that seem impossible when considering the mathematical and geographical knowledge of their time. He also highlighted the striking similarities between different civilizations around the world, from stoneworking techniques to creation myths. And then he asked a provocative question. What if the history we have been taught is completely wrong? What if human civilization is far older than we ever imagined and rooted in a shared ancient past? Several years after Chariots of the Gods was published, a different name began to gain attention among researchers and alternative historians. In 1976, Zecharia Sitchin released his book, The 12th Planet, the first volume of what would later become a 7-book series known as the Earth Chronicles. With this book, a specific term entered popular culture and never truly left it: the Anunnaki. Today, if you search the internet or watch documentaries on this subject, you will quickly notice something strange. Many people present Sitchin's claims not as theories, but as unquestionable facts. They speak with absolute certainty. They came from a planet called Nibiru. They arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. They created humans to mine gold. They left, but they will return. These stories are often told as if the speakers themselves had been there to witness it all. Believing in the Anunnaki is one thing. Speaking about them as if they were family history is something else entirely. That is why, in this video, I will not rely solely on Sitchin's interpretations. And there is a good reason for that. Yes, Sitchin spent decades studying ancient texts and comparing myths across cultures, but when the tablets fell silent, when the text left gaps, he often filled those gaps with his own conclusions. Some might argue that this is what writers do, that building a compelling narrative sometimes requires interpretation, and that may be true. But today, many of those interpretations are repeated as historical fact, without distinction between what is written on the tablets and what was added later. My goal here is different. In this video, I will focus on what the ancient texts actually say, and then compare them with myths and religious narratives from around the world. Where connections are clear, we will follow them. Where speculation begins, we will slow down. Because understanding the Anunnaki requires separating evidence from imagination. And for that, we must return to where this story truly begins, Mesopotamia. According to conventional history, around 4500 BCE, the Sumerian civilization appears almost suddenly, already highly advanced. They were the first to develop writing, the first to study astronomy in a systematic way, the first to use advanced mathematics. They established the first known legal systems, the first hospitals, the first libraries. Even the concept of recorded history itself begins with them. And this raises an uncomfortable question. How did a civilization emerge with so much knowledge as if it appeared fully formed? Why does it feel as though someone opened the book of human history halfway through? This question led some researchers to consider another possibility. What if the Sumerians were not the beginning, but the continuation of something much older? And that single question is what ultimately brings us to the Anunnaki. In the late 19th century, archaeologists working in the region of modern-day Iraq made discoveries that would fundamentally challenge humanity's understanding of its own past. Beneath layers of sand and soil, in ancient cities such as Nippur, Ur, and Nineveh, thousands of clay tablets were uncovered. These were not symbolic carvings or decorative inscriptions. They were written records, administrative documents, hymns, myths, and detailed stories about the origins of the world and humanity itself. It took decades for scholars to translate these tablets, but once they did, a remarkable narrative began to emerge, a story not of divine perfection, but of struggle, labor, and creation. One of the most important of these texts is known today as the Enki and Ninmah tablets, closely connected to the Atrahasis epic. Together, they describe the creation of human beings. According to these texts, before humans existed, the Anunnaki were not alone. There was a lower class of beings beneath them, often referred to as the Igigi. These beings were tasked with the hard labor. They dug canals, they built structures, they maintained the land, they provided food for the Anunnaki. And here is an important detail that often gets overlooked. Despite being described as gods, the Anunnaki are repeatedly shown as beings who needed shelter, food, and rest. They were not abstract forces. They were physical entities. Over time, the workload placed on the Igigi became unbearable. Eventually, they revolted. In modern terms, this may have been the first labor strike in recorded history. Faced with rebellion and crisis, the Anunnaki searched for a solution. This is where Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation, enters the story. Alongside him is Ninmah, a goddess associated with birth and life. Together, they propose a radical idea to create a new being, one that could take over the labor. The tablets describe a series of failed attempts, beings created with missing limbs, others unable to function properly. But, finally, a successful formula is found. Clay, taken from the earth, is mixed with the essence of the gods, a balanced combination of earthly material and divine substance. Zecharia Sitchin later interpreted this earthly material as early hominids or primitive humans. Whether that interpretation is correct or not, the outcome in the tablets is clear. A new being is created in the image of the gods. the first human. According to Sumerian texts, his name was Adapa. He was not created as a ruler, he was created as a worker. But Enki grew fond of him, and because of this, Adapa was taught knowledge, agriculture, law, language, the names of things. This detail is crucial because it echoes a story we encounter much later in the Quran, where Adam is taught the names, symbolizing knowledge itself. Once humans gained this knowledge, they multiplied. They began serving the gods directly, building temples and great structures known as ziggurats. These were described as the dwellings of the gods. Over time, this idea evolved into what we now call temples, churches, and mosques, often referred to as the house of God. Humans provided food for the gods: meat, fruit, grain, wine, and beer. This practice would later transform into ritual sacrifice. In essence, humanity became a labor force created to replace the rebelling Igigi. And among their many tasks, one stands out: mining. The tablets repeatedly reference the Anunnaki's interest in gold and the processes used to extract it. While the claim that gold was needed to repair another planet's atmosphere remains speculative, one fact is undeniable: gold held extraordinary importance. Across civilizations, gold became associated with divinity, power, and immortality. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs covered themselves in gold to present themselves as living gods. Even today, gold remains a critical material in advanced technology, a coincidence worth thinking about. At this point, a reasonable question might come to mind. Why would early humans worship beings that were, according to these texts, physical and mortal? The answer lies in perception. The less a society understands, the more likely it is to label the unknown as divine. To understand this, we can look at a modern example. During World War II, the United States military established air bases on remote islands in the Pacific, including parts of Papua New Guinea. At the time, many of the local tribes had never encountered modern technology. They had no concept of airplanes, radios, or industrial production. As cargo planes flew overhead, supplies were dropped by parachute. Food, tools, and equipment descended from the sky. To the local population, these events were beyond explanation. The war eventually ended. The soldiers left. The cargo stopped coming. Years later, researchers returned to the area. What they found was extraordinary. Some tribes had built full-scale replicas of airplanes using wood and bamboo. They cleared runways. They wore imitation uniforms. They performed rituals, all in the hope that the gods would return and once again deliver gifts from the sky. This phenomenon is now known as a cargo cult, and it reveals something fundamental about human nature. When people cannot understand technology, they often turn it into religion. Now, imagine the perspective of early humanity, a young species with no knowledge of science or engineering, and suddenly beings arrive who descend from the sky, possess advanced knowledge, control resources, and shape the environment. From that point of view, worship would not be irrational. It would be inevitable. According to the ancient texts, as humans multiplied, their numbers grew, their voices became louder, and their independence increased. Symbolically, this suggests that humanity was evolving, and this development angered Enlil in the Sumerian epics. Enlil complains that humans had become too numerous, too noisy, and too difficult to control. His solution was drastic. To wipe them out, the decision was made to send a great flood, to erase humanity entirely and start over. What makes this especially important is one detail. The gods knew the flood was coming. They believed they could reset the world and create a new, more obedient humanity afterward. But Enki disagreed. Unlike Enlil, Enki had grown attached to humans, and so he chose to intervene. He warned a human named Ziusudra through a dream, instructing him to build a vessel to survive the coming catastrophe. Ziusudra followed these instructions. The flood came, the world was destroyed, and when the waters receded, the vessel came to rest on a mountain. This story marks the beginning of a second era, an era where humans and gods continue to coexist. The same story appears again later, this time with different names. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enki warns Utnapishtim. He speaks to him through the wall of his house, giving detailed instructions on how to build the ship. For 6 days and 7 nights, the flood raged. When the waters finally retreated, the ship rested on a mountain. Birds were released. When one did not return, it was a sign that land had emerged. Utnapishtim offered food as a sacrifice, and once again the gods gathered to eat. This moment symbolizes reconciliation, but it also marks the beginning of the end, because according to these myths, after this era, the gods eventually leave Earth and humanity enters the historical age we recognize today. At this stage, even historians and researchers who study ancient civilizations face a serious problem. The timeline becomes unclear. There are 2 major periods described in the ancient texts. One is the era of the Great Flood, the other is the era of conflict among the gods. Which one came first? Based on the fragments we have today, it appears that the flood occurred first, and the second era came to an end with an event later remembered as the Tower of Babel. But this chronology is far from certain, and the reason is simple. We are missing a large part of the story. Tens of thousands of tablets have never been found. Others were destroyed, and many remain untranslated or inaccessible. Large portions of humanity's earliest history are still buried beneath the ground or locked away beyond public reach. In recent history, the very regions where these ancient records were discovered have been destabilized by war. Museums were looted, archaeological sites were destroyed, entire cities were reduced to rubble. When Iraq fell, countless artifacts and tablets were removed and transported out of the country under military supervision. This is not speculation. There is documented evidence of these events. History is not only forgotten. In some cases, it is actively concealed. Now, setting that aside, based on the information we currently possess, the simplest version of the Anunnaki narrative looks like this. Beings from the heavens arrive on Earth. They create humanity to serve them. They guide the earliest stages of civilization. And after a series of conflicts and disasters, they leave. But this raises another critical question. If these stories appear in ancient Sumerian texts, why do we find almost identical narratives in the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran? Does this mean the origins of religion are connected to these beings? This question marks a turning point, because from here on, we are no longer just talking about mythology. We are talking about belief. When we compare cultures across the world, we notice a repeating pattern. A supreme figure at the top, a council beneath them, often 12 members. In Sumer, we see Anu, Enlil, and Enki with a council of 12 Anunnaki. In ancient Egypt, Amun stands above Osiris and Set. In ancient Greece, Kronos, Zeus, and Poseidon rule alongside 12 Olympian gods. In Hinduism, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva form a divine triad. And in later religious traditions, similar structures reappear in new forms. The pattern is consistent, not only in hierarchy, but in the stories themselves: floods sent to cleanse humanity, chosen survivors, a promise of renewal, and a hope that the gods will one day return. Across continents, across thousands of years, the same story is told again and again. And this leads us to a final, unavoidable question. Are these similarities coincidence, or are they echoes of a shared ancient memory? At this point, one final question remains. If these ancient stories existed thousands of years before the rise of modern religions, then what exactly are religions built upon? When we examine belief systems closely, we begin to see a transformation rather than a contradiction. Early humans explained the unknown through myth. They described powerful beings in human terms. They turned encounters into stories, and stories into traditions. As societies evolved, those traditions were refined. What was once many gods became fewer. What was once a council became a single authority. Conflicts between gods were rewritten as moral tests. Advanced knowledge became divine wisdom. This process did not erase the old stories. It reshaped them. Polytheism slowly compressed into monotheism, not because the stories disappeared, but because humanity's understanding changed. This does not mean religion is false. It means religion is human, a framework built to explain existence, morality, and the forces beyond our control. From this perspective, the Anunnaki are not proof of aliens, nor are they simply fictional gods. They represent something deeper. They are the earliest attempt to understand power, creation, and authority. Whether the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings, advanced humans, or symbolic representations of forgotten events remains unknown. There is no definitive evidence that confirms or denies their existence, but one truth remains undeniable. Humanity has always looked to the sky for answers. We have always searched for meaning beyond ourselves. And when faced with the unknown, we turn it into story. The Anunnaki may not have been gods. They may not have been visitors from another world, but they were the foundation of humanity's oldest questions. And those questions are still with us today.